Spider-Man Hostile Takeover. Chapter 18. Peter had pastrami on his mind. Yes, he was a little worried about how things were going with MJ, but he knew they would work things out. They'd been together for a long time, and each had to bend if they were going to grow together. She'd already put up with things that were beyond what any girlfriend should endure. Whatever she needed from him, he'd find a way to make sure she got it. She was already waiting for him and in line when he walked through the door. He checked his wristwatch just before he gave her a quick kiss. "You're living dangerous," he said, showing up early. "And you're on your best behavior, showing up almost on time." "Exactly on time," he said, tapping his watch. Wearing one made him a bit of a relic. He knew it. But it had belonged to Uncle Ben, and he liked having it close. The line ahead of them was pretty long, and it only took a few minutes for it to begin sneaking behind Peter. He looked around, hoping they'd be able to find a place to sit. "So," he said, "maybe this isn't the best place to have a serious conversation. But since we're going to work things out anyhow, maybe we should talk about it now. So, your sandwich pleasure isn't in any way diminished?" "It's a good sandwich," he admitted. "I'd hate for anything to ruin it." "I'm glad you have your priorities straight." "Absolutely." "Okay," she began. "Well, I think you're right that it doesn't have to be a big deal, as long as you actually hear what I'm saying. But this is serious, Peter. So you really have to hear me out. Not just agree, but hear what I'm saying and make changes based on it." "Right," he mumbled. But he was already distracted. Looking annoyed, MJ glanced around and saw why. There were a pair of cops ahead of them on line. They were, in fact, about to get their sandwiches, but one of them said something into his radio, and they rushed out, leaving dinner behind. Another pair of officers ran down the street past the shop's window. "Something big is going on," Peter said. "You want me to order you something?" "Would you mind? Put it in your fridge. I'll come by later if I can." "Not too late," she said. "Or it might not have survived the wait. I'll take the chances." He gave her a quick kiss and rushed out the door. Something hovered quickly in his peripheral vision, like a familiar face. But he didn't have time to sort it out. This wasn't exactly the moment to say hi to whomever it might have been. If it was someone he should have recognized, they'd have to deal with it. One of the advantages of being famously flaky was that no one was surprised when you flaked. The moment she stepped into the sandwich place, Anika felt sure she was making a mistake. Then she looked at the menu posted over the counter and decided she could probably live with the consequences. To the far right, people were collecting their sandwiches they ordered, some to-go orders in bags, others on trays. And once she caught sight of them, there was no way she was turning around. This place really did look good. There was Peter, talking to a woman with red hair. She really was pretty. Anika had hoped she would look mean, but she didn't. There was no sign of them arguing either. They seemed entirely comfortable with each other. Just a normal couple having normal couple problems. Anika decided she needed to get out more. She worked so hard at school that she lost perspective on how normal people live. She'd get her dinner, go spend some quality time with her cat, and rethink her life. She needed more time with the menu, though. The line wasn't moving fast, but she wanted to be prepared when her turn came. Then, she noticed a commotion. Policemen started shouting into their squawking radios and dashed out of the restaurant, joining up with other officers running past outside. A few seconds later, Peter took off, running right past her but not even noticing her. Why would he do that? She wondered. What does he have to do with the police? She'd have to run some theories by her cat when she got home. Anika sighed. At least now she didn't have to worry about being spotted. Wouldn't it be nice, Peter thought, if I could actually spend a little quality time with my girlfriend in a delicious sandwich? It was as if the city was conspiring against him. He hadn't been patrolling or listening to a police radio. He'd even had his phone turned off. But no, the crisis had to go waving its arms right in front of his face. And of course, he couldn't just ignore it. If anyone ended up getting hurt just because he wanted to spend some time with MJ, well, no point in even thinking about it. Peter doesn't work that way. Ducking into the shadows of a niche between buildings, he dodged a pile of trash and clambered up a wall onto the roof. Once there, he changed into a spider suit and monitored the police chatter through his mask. West of Central Park, over at an auction house called Roseman's. Some nuts had taken a bunch of people hostage. There were children in there. Or there might be children in there. There were conflicting reports about the number and type of hostages, as well as the perpetrators. Someone said it was a lone wacko with a gun. Another said it was someone with superpowers. By the time he arrived, the logistics of this thing were still a mess. It was always a risk to interact with cops. Occasionally, he encountered one who was overzealous and wanted to be the guy who captured Spider-Man. Still, he needed more information if he was going to help, and he found a solitary officer who just helped to clear the perimeter. A couple of teenagers had tried to push their way through, and this guy had ushered them away. But he'd done it without being a jerk about it. He seemed to be sympathetic with the fact that teenagers were, by nature, going to do stupid things. So it was worth a shot. He leapt down and landed on a brick wall right next to the police officer. Holy crap! The guy took a step back. You're Spider-Man! Got it in the first try, Peter replied. And you? Jeff Davis, he said. You know what's going on in there? I was hoping you could tell me, so we could see if there was any way I could help. The whole thing feels hinky to me. The cop shook his head. We've got a bunch of conflicting reports, but so far, no hard evidence. The infrared and sound mic guys are set up, but so far they haven't been able to pick up anything. It's a big place with its own warehouse, but that doesn't explain it. There's still some itchy questions. Like, who takes hostages in an auction house at night? Exactly, the cop touched his nose. Something's fishy. You said it, Spider-Man replied. Thanks for your help. He pushed off and leapt upward, bounding back and forth between two buildings until he reached the roof. From that vantage point, he looked down at the auction house and its storage facility. There were a few points of entry, including one on the roof, and they all looked quiet. He was grateful that the cop had been so helpful. He wished now he'd been paying attention when he said his name, Jefferson or something like that. Inside Roseman's, everything was completely quiet. There weren't even any security guards, because they all had been evacuated. After doing extensive recon, Spider-Man took out his phone and called Yuri Watanabe. You hear anything about this Roseman situation? He asked her. I'm inside, but I don't see anything. It's completely deserted. You shouldn't be messing around with hostage situation, Watanabe said. That's my point, he answered. There are no hostages. No hostage takers. No one at all. Are you sure? She asked. Half the department is down there. They're treating this like a major crisis. They've even called in a hazmat team. There's a rumor that a dirty bomb might be involved. Maybe a dusty bomb, Spider-Man said, running his fingers along the wall. It's possible something could be hidden in one of these crates, but there's no sign of anything bad guyish at all. It feels like a complete false alarm, or... He stopped himself. Pretty sure Watanabe was thinking the same thing. A decoy! Anika watched MJ online ahead of her. She hadn't seemed angry at all that Peter had ran out on her. Then she ordered 2 sandwiches, presumably one for him, and waited for her food. She leaned against the wall and poked at her phone, but didn't gripe or look angry or call anyone to complain. She seemed nice, just like Peter was nice. Isn't that just terrific, she thought wryly. The girlfriend picked up her order around the time Anika placed hers. She went and stood where the girlfriend had been, vaguely monitoring the atmosphere for nasty vibes, but not picking up on anything. She took out her phone and began scrolling through the news feed. The best thing she could possibly do was distract herself from the fact that she'd been stalking. Then she heard the screaming. She looked up, and one of them was in the restaurant. One of those people who wore costumes, and not one of the good ones. He had a yellow puffy suit that almost looked like a winter jacket, and a yellow hood with an orange stripe down the middle. There was a mechanical contraption on his back, and he had a metal gauntlets that seemed to be wired into the device. "I am the Sinister Shocker!" The man cried in a muffled voice by his mask. "Here to cause mayhem and destruction!" He turned to the door and bursts of teeth-rattling vibrations emanated from his gauntlets. The metal around the door buckled and folded in around itself, leaving everyone trapped inside. Anika felt panic welling up. "Let's just calm down," a man said, stepping forward. He was dressed like he'd just come from the gym, and his muscles were bulging out of his tank top. It looked like he wanted to play the hero, but he was also being cautious. Approaching slowly with his hands up. "We can talk about this." "This isn't a time for conversation!" Shocker proclaimed. A burst exploded from his gauntlets. The man flew backward and landed on the floor, twitching, but still alive. It was as if he was tased or bludgeoned or something. That was a sign the Shocker didn't want to kill anyone. At least, she hoped it was. Her phone was in her hand anyhow, so with trembling fingers, Anika opened the camera app, turned it to video, and began recording. The police were going to want to see as much evidence as possible. She could show them when this was all over, and if she didn't make it, well, people would say she'd been a thoughtful citizen until the end. "Prepare for the worst!" Shocker cried out, as if he was trying to make sure they can hear him in the cheap seats. It was like the guy who never dealt with people before. But wasn't he a known villain? "There will be violence! You, there!" He pointed to a teenager wearing a hoodie. "Do you have a heart condition?" What on earth? Anika thought. The kid shook his head. The Shocker hit him with a blast from his gauntlets. "Let that be a taste of my power!" There was something very wrong about this, and Anika wasn't the only one who seemed to be aware. People were looking around with obvious confusion. No one said anything, though, trying not to draw the lunatic's attention. Then, Spider-Man showed up. He leapt in from the back room, sailing across the restaurant and slamming his feet first into Shocker's chest. The villain staggered, and the device on his back struck the wall with a crunching sound. "Hey!" Shocker shouted. "Be careful!" "Forget that," Spider-Man said. "I'm gonna mess you up, Shocker!" "I have a room full of hostages here, Spider-Man!" The villain answered back. As loud as it was, his voice was as empty of actual emotion as a fourth grader reciting lines from a school play. "If you attempt to apprehend me, I will kill them!" "You think I care about these losers?" Spider-Man asked, gesturing toward the huddled civilians. "They're not rich or famous. What I care about is getting the credit for stopping you. If some people have to die along the way, that just means I've bagged a bigger fish." "You won't take me in," Shocker said. "I've wired this restaurant with a bomb. If you stop me, we'll all die." "Not me with my enhanced reflexes," Spider-Man replied. "I'll get away. If you're dead, what do I care if you take the hostages with you? I'm done with this, one of the hostages shouted. A burly man wearing a windbreaker. He picked up a trash can and threw it hard against the window. The glass shattered, and he, along with a dozen other people, raced out of the restaurant. Anika wondered if she could make it. She'd have to cross Shocker's line of vision to get to the window, but he didn't seem to be paying attention to his hostages anymore. He was more interested in circling around Spider-Man. If it really was him. That was starting to seem unlikely. Anika had been too busy with school to pay attention to the costume heroes who had always seemed to be cropping up, but she'd always kind of liked Spider-Man. In the news footage, he was always cracking jokes and saving kids who wandered in front of traffic. She supposed this man's claim not to care about the victims might be an act, something to throw the Shocker off his game, but that didn't feel right to her. "Your hostages are getting away," Spider-Man said. "Don't you think you should do something?" He looked over at a man, cowering near him, and grabbed him by the wrist, yanking hard. He tossed him at the villain, who dodged out of the way. Then the two of them began to grapple. That was her chance. Other people were climbing through the broken window. Yet she felt as if it was somehow important to record this, to preserve the data. That's what she did. It was a piece of the puzzle, and even if she didn't know what that puzzle was, someone was going to need it. Still, restaurant wired to blow? It was better not to ignore that sort of thing. So she began to move toward the gaping hole in the window, but slowly, holding up her phone so she could record the two men fighting, or pretending to fight, maybe. More and more, it looked faked. Suddenly, the Shocker looked up. "We need to go," he called out, and the two of them dashed into the kitchen together. Oh no. Anika lowered her phone and moved quickly toward the window. If I can just... There was a flash of light. Then, there was nothing.